I've been writing books longer than I was a musician. I mean, I've been the last 10 years, so I think in actual time put in, been a writer longer than I was a musician, but I haven't gotten into any sort of occult Hall of Fame yet, so who knows.
You mentioned that Colin Wilson was sort of your introduction to the occult. You ended up interviewing him for 14 times later on, did you?
Oh yeah, no, I've met Colin quite a few times. We actually became friends. I mean, I went out of my way to meet him because I just became a complete fanatic about his books after reading The Occult and Mysteries, and then The Mind Parasites and Philosopher's Stone, and of course The Outsider. I mean, that had a major influence on me. And in 1983, with a friend of mine, we went on sort of a mini search of the miraculous, just going from Los Angeles to Europe, and we came to England and France and Amsterdam, Holland for a while. We went to different sort of sites, Glastonbury and Avery and Stonehenge, and we found Gurdjieff's Priory in the forest in Fontainebleau and things of that sort. But at one point on the trip, I went off by myself down to Cornwall, where Colin Wilson lives and has lived since the late 50s, and just kind of planted myself at his place, and he turned up, and he very kindly and generously invited me in, and I stayed there, and we had and started an acquaintance, and I corresponded with him, and I've written quite a bit about his work. I think he's one of the most important, thrilling writers, still working too. He's still at it. So yes, I've kept in touch, and I've interviewed him a few times, and I've reviewed quite a few of his books for some of the dailies here. So yeah, there's a strong connection with the Wilson.
So your most recent book is Politics and the Occult, The Left, the Right, and the Radically Unseen. And we've been going through this book in the past couple of weeks, and we found that it presents a great overview of the progress of the Western esoteric tradition over the past, say, 400, 500 years. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about this book and, sort of maybe introduce our audience to this idea of the occult tradition in the West?
Well, there is what's called the Western Inner Tradition, or the Western Esoteric, or the Hermetic tradition, and it's basically it's kind of I would say it's kind of a counterculture to mainstream Western intellectual tradition, although it's only been a counterculture for the last few centuries, because for the longer stretch of time it was a widely accepted body of writing and knowledge and study, having to do with the unseen. The occult means that it's occluded. It's not seen. It's not necessarily hidden, but it's not something that's readily visible. And its origins are, as most of these things are, shrouded in mystery. So depending on what your sources are, it goes back to the Egyptians. There's a lot of different popular accounts, and some of them are a bit more outrageous than others. But the way I've been writing about it, or the sort of angle I've been taking, is looking at it as this kind of counterculture, or this counter-tradition that started after the rise of science and rationalism, and the sort of scientific materialist view that's still the dominant sort of view in the West, well, pretty much the whole world now. And what I say is that after the rise of that, all of this notion about any sort of hidden or invisible, mystical or supernatural, whatever you want to call it, reality became kind of jettisoned. It was abandoned, and it became what the historian Jocelyn Godwin calls rejected knowledge. And some very very famous, influential people involved in this. People like Isaac Newton, who we recognize as the father of modern science. Well, he wrote more about alchemy and sort of biblical exegesis than he did about gravity, and many others of similar importance. Brilliant writers like Goethe and other sort of philosophers and so on. We're all sort of steeped in this tradition, and after the rise of science, materialistic science, which there's nothing wrong with science, but there's almost a religion that came out of it, what I call scientism. And it's this ideology that everything in the universe, everything can be explained in terms of sort of reductive, scientific, materialist methodology. It has to be able to be measured and, detectable by the senses and so on, the standard thing. Well, there are quite a few people that weren't particularly completely satisfied with that, and they looked to this older tradition of the Hermetic. It's called Hermetic because it's supposed to have begun when the legendary figure Hermes Trismegistus, which means thrice greatest Hermes, when he had a visionary experience in which the divine mind explained to him, the secrets of the universe, and then he passed these on to people that came after him. And alchemy comes out of this, astrology, this notion of as above and so below, and the correspondences. And I'm actually gone back into looking into the roots of this now, because I'm about to start a book on the Hermetic tradition now and try and understand it as this, long, cohesive line of thought from ancient times and up until now. But this became this kind of reservoir of sort of ammunition that different poets and writers and thinkers could kind of use to bolster their sense of something being missing, something being lost by this rise of science. Because basically it chucked out anything that had to do with any kind of value or meaning. And, the universe was reduced to a clockwork machine, and human beings were reduced to sort of robots, and we were moved and pushed and pulled by, purely material, physical, purposeless forces. And the whole Hermetic tradition is, the opposite of that there are these sort of vital, hidden energies that course through the universe, but also through man and humankind, the macrocosm and the microcosm. So this became something that was picked up in a book called, in the States it's called The Dark Muse, and here it's the Daedalus book of the Occult, A Dark Muse. That in that book I talk about how it influenced writers and poets in the 18th, 19th, and 20th century. You mentioned Turn Off Your Mind earlier, and that was a book about the 1960s, where similarly I look at a more narrow or more highly sort of focused time, the decade of the 1960s, early into the early 70s, when many of these ideas resurfaced and became the kind of guiding light behind the counterculture then. And I think, these ideas have always been very embraced very much by popular culture, or what folk culture, we call it popular culture today, but folk culture, in opposition, say, to the authorities who are, telling people, no, the spirits don't exist and things of that sort. I mean, the folk or the people, the popular mind tends to gravitate towards this because, rightly so, because there's some truth in it, and it recognizes it. So that's, and there's many. I mean, most people that have some vague idea about this Western Hermetic tradition, they know people like Aleister Crowley, who was this wild British magician in the 20th century, and he's mostly known more for his sort of wild lifestyle, excessive. He lived large. He had a supersized life way before McDonald's. He had enormous amounts of drugs and had sex with anything, and this wild, crazy, radical life. And he got picked up in the 60s as this kind of proto-hippie, and then his books were starting to be revived and read again. He wrote a lot about drugs, and the Diary of a Drug Fiend is a very popular book, and so on. So I try and take this magical tradition and show that it supports or influences the counterculture, the sort of counter tradition to the standard Western materialist tradition.